A very good afternoon once again to everyone, and thank you for dialing in to this webinar session. I hope you had a good lunch earlier. Today, IHRP is very pleased to partner Sriram Iyer and his team at hrtech.sg and Microsoft in organizing this event. My name is Adam Baso. I'm the Assistant Director of the Professional Practices and Community from the IHRP. Welcome all to this webinar on navigating the new world of work. Before I pass the floor to our speakers from Microsoft, let me now run through the basic housekeeping protocols. This session will be recorded for knowledge content sharing. For question and answers, please submit your questions via the Q&A functionality at the bottom of the MS Teams Live window. If your question is for a specific panelist, please share the question in the following format: the name of the panelist, followed by the question. In order to minimize disruptions, participants' video and microphone will be disabled. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to address all questions, but we will definitely follow up with a response after the webinar. The chat function has also been enabled to allow you for better engagement with the participants and the speakers particularly. Next, please. The sharing of presentation materials, please refrain from taking any screenshots of the presentation or slides. We will be sending across the approved materials for sharing to attendees in a follow-up email for your kind reference and information. Do note that these materials should not be on-forwarded or redistributed to non-attendees. I'm also very pleased to announce that for you participating in this webinar session, out of these 20 lucky IHRP certified professionals who attend this webinar can stand a chance to visit the Microsoft Experience Center in person on the 27th of June 2022, which is next month. The selected participants or the lucky winners will be informed in the first week of June. So watch through your email for our notification of whether you are selected to be the 20 lucky participants. Yes, in moving on, I'm very pleased to do a quick introduction to our speakers. We start off with Vivek Ravindran, who is the Business Group Lead for Modern Work and Security Business at Microsoft Asia Pacific. He has 26 over years of experience in the technology industry in the areas of software development support, account management, and business management, spanning both technology, operations, and business skills. Next up, we have Nishan Santisan in the Employee Experience Solution Lead for the Microsoft Asia. Nishan's work involves advising and helping business leaders to leverage organizational data to deliver powerful insights to create strong organizational cultures with Microsoft Viva. Next up, we have Raj Singh, is the Product Marketing Lead for Viva and Teams platform at Microsoft Asia Pacific. Raj works with sales, partner, and engineer teams to create product success for customers. I think with that, I pass the floor over to Vivek to proceed on with the session. Vivek, please.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much for the lovely warm introduction. A very warm welcome to all the participants this afternoon. I'm very grateful that you chose to spend your valuable time with us this afternoon. We have plenty to share with you. Hope you'll find these couple of hours of value to you and to your organization. Now, before I kind of break into the agenda, I just want to extend a thanks to the organizing team from IHRP, and also a very special thanks to Sriram and the hrtech.sg team for making all this possible. Industry connections with functional professionals such as yourselves is extremely important, both to keep us honest, but also have an opportunity for us to share in terms of where we are thinking the industry and the function is evolving to. So this partnership is crucial. And so I want to thank all of you for taking the time to do this once again. Just in terms of agenda and the way the next couple of hours, we'll perhaps break it into these 4 sections. I want to kick off setting some context today and share with you on how we want to spend the rest of the time. and why this topic is so important about making hybrid work, reimagining employee experience, reimagining workspaces. I think this is all over the news now, and you folks are, I'm sure, interested to know why this is important and what is kind of Microsoft's practical approach to make your lives a little bit easier. I'll then invite Raj to share some findings. So one of the things that we do pride ourselves upon is there's a lot of conversations on what is the best approach to manage employee experience, manage return to work, and what's the fine balance that we need between productivity and well-being. Our approach always has been we lead with data and not dogma. And so one of the things that we've been continuing to do right through COVID is conduct a lot of research on how employee work patterns are evolving and what is the impact that it's having on people's well-being and also their work aspirations. So Raj will perhaps share that data and a few interesting trends with you, which are very insightful. And then Raj will be followed by Nishant. And what we really want to do is we want to take you through some practical use cases and scenarios that we think might be useful to you as HR professionals and CHROs in this audience on how to put insights and employee experience to work for your organization in a very data-driven way. And then hopefully we'll have some Q&A. Please feel free to use the Q&A panel that you can see in your chat window. We'll continue to engage you through that application as well. So let me then get started. So I want to set some context. Now, it's no rocket science, it's no mystery to any of us. The pandemic's changed many parts of our life. I would say perhaps irrevocably in a lot of cases. And the way we work has been no exception to that. We are not the same people that went home to work in the early 2020. And I think the collective experience of the past 2 years has perhaps left a lasting imprint, fundamentally changing how we define the role of work in our lives. We've been talking about the Great Resignation. We frame it as the Great Reshuffle. I'm sure you've read tons of material on it. The Great Reshuffle is far from over. Employees everywhere are rethinking their worth it equation. Raj will share a little bit more data around this, but they're really rethinking their worth it equation. Why is it worth it to come to work? Why is it worth it to come and work for you? And are actually voting with their feet. And as more people experience the upsides of what we're calling flexible work, the more heavily it is factoring into this equation. Now, as far as Gen Z and millennials go, there is no going back. And you know, every generation is not far behind. And so companies are really trying to struggle to meet employees where they are, as far as this notion of employee experience and hybrid work goes. And so as leaders like yourselves puzzle over how to make employee experience and hybrid work, there are some big questions that loom, which is, what is the evolving role of the office? How do teams build social capital in a digital first world? And so the challenge ahead for every organization, including us, is to meet employees' great new expectations head on one hand, while balancing business outcomes, especially in an unpredictable economy. And that has actually brought into sharp focus the increasing role of HR professionals such as yourselves in the audience. And you will agree with me, there's a lot of literature on this now. HR is now a key strategic function, not just the admin function of old, that is shaping organizational strategy. In fact, I'll give you an example. I was on a panel discussion just earlier this year, and some of you may know this lady. Her name is Peta Latimer. She runs Mercer in Singapore. She's the CEO for Singapore. And in that panel discussion, she was telling me this, and she was telling the crowd, and I want to attribute this to her, that what the financial crisis with Enron and Lehman Brothers and subprime did for the CFO, the pandemic is going to do for the CHRO. And I thought that was fairly profound, and it's not far from the truth in terms of how your job functions are evolving. You all are increasingly having a louder voice at the leadership table, and that is becoming a significant point of differentiation for your organizations and the way you acquire, nurture, and grow talent within your organizations. Which brings me to today and this specific set of sessions that we have planned for you. The aim of today's engagement with all of you is to really help you envision the possibilities of how employee well-being and culture can be diagnosed, measured, and improved upon, and hopefully leave you with some practical application areas, use cases, scenarios to make it real for yourselves and your organization. Now, before I invite the next speaker, Raj, I would like you to consider and keep the following questions that I want to display. Keep these questions in mind as you go over the rest of the session and reflect back on these as we present to you more and more content so that you can start relating some of these existential questions, if I can call it that, to how we want to kind of approach this employee well-being. The first one is, how do you measure and improve your employees' lived-in experience? What is lived-in experience? How do you measure it? How do you improve upon it? Is there a way that you can do that? The second thing is, can culture be a KPI? So now culture can mean many things. One of the things we do, we did a lot of things during and even post-COVID, but one of the things we do as kind of a team norm, you might call it that, is turn on recording and transcription in every meeting, as being respectful for those employees that may be non-native English speakers. So as a sign of inclusion, if you record the meeting, then people can go back and listen to the meetings at their own time and perhaps at 1.5 times twice the speed, so they can get to the crux of the meeting. So a 1-hour meeting can be done in 15 minutes. Culture could mean other things as well. One of the other things that we did and we've been doing for the last 2.5 years is we have something called Learning Fridays, and I'm sure every organization has a variation of this. Every Friday, we encourage every employee in the area to set aside their half a day, perhaps the full day, depending on time, to just focus on self-development, learning, and skilling. Now, we know skilling, learning, development is perhaps in the top 3 why employees choose to stay or leave an organization. And I think it's a great way for employees to be accountable for their own self-learning and development and skilling. But also a great sign to say that the company and the organization believes in your readiness and believes in you upskilling yourselves for the complexity of the jobs that are going to come. The thing is, everyone is doing some variation of this. The question I want you to consider as you go through the rest of the session is, can all of this be deemed as culture? And this culture, can it be converted to a KPI that you can measure and improve? The third question that I want to talk about is, and this is exceptionally important as more and more business leaders look for HR to help drive that fine balance between employee productivity and employee well-being. And you'll hear Raj talk more about this in his session. But there's really it's 2 sides of the same coin, employee productivity and employee well-being. But how do you ensure that you can show either correlation or causation in a manner that your senior business leadership can understand, where you're able to draw a clear straight line between employee productivity, employee well-being efforts and the impact it's having on employee productivity? And then the last point I want you to consider is, all of this is great, but how do you diagnose issues in your organization in a very data-driven way, near real time? A traditional way to do this, and we do this as well, we are no different, is you do the 3-month or the 6-monthly pulse surveys, and then you go ahead and look at the results, and then you put some corrective action. But between issue and remediation, there's anywhere between a 3 to 6 month gap, as you would acknowledge. What we want to really think about is there a better way for you to diagnose and measure issues in a data-driven manner, near real time, so that when you observe it, you can quickly intervene? Anyway, those are the some questions that I thought might be useful in the context of what we want to share with you. Without much further ado, I want to invite Raj and get to the meat of the next discussion. So Raj, over to you. Thank you once again, all of you. A very warm welcome. Over to you, Raj.
Thank you so much, Vivek. And thank you so much, team, for the opportunity. Honestly, I was so excited for this session because we get to talk to a group of people to which this matters the most. I love that quote from Beta and what Vivek rephrased, right? Like the CHRO is really the new CFO. Like it's the biggest seat at that table along with the CEO that we've experienced. The one thing that I've realized while talking to customers and partners, so on, is that there seems to be a lot of thought around that, we moved to remote work during the pandemic. We moved to hybrid in a way. And now that the pandemic is opening up, when we go back to office, everything's going to be the same. And that's something that we're realizing is not true, right? Because we cannot ignore the lived experience that we collectively have gone through over the past 2 years. We've been changed forever, right? Like we made investments in our own personal life. We have this model, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in terms of people, processes, and places. Think about how your own office desk at home has changed over the past 2 years, right? So that's the kind of change that we've seen right now and people's expectations changing around it. So my intent for the next 20 minutes or so is to showcase a strong body of work that Microsoft has done on understanding first remote work and now understanding what hybrid work is all about. Then there is another body of work that we've done with the Josh Bersin company. So Josh Bersin is an HR leader and practitioner. He set up the Bersin company back in 2001, which was later acquired by Deloitte. And then he set up his own firm as a Josh Bersin Academy. And we partnered with him to come up with a maturity assessment that anyone can take. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Next slide, please. So the biggest body of work that we invested in over the past 2 years is something called the Work Trend Index. How we do this is we survey over 31,000 information and frontline workers. We combine the data from what we see from M365 and the labor trends on LinkedIn to understand how employee sentiments are changing, how is technology playing a role in it, and how that might change the way we work. So we did the study in 14 countries in Asia Pacific, including China, Hong Kong, India, rest of Southeast Asia, and we've come up with some interesting insights I'd love for us to have a look at. Next slide, please. Before we go into what the 2022 version says, I love to highlight from the 2021 version. So 2021 was an interesting time because there were certain countries globally that were going back to office. In Asia, we saw certain countries open up, whereas other countries still had stronger regulations and going back to office. But more or less, it was like going back, coming back, like the switch to remote was happening fairly fast. And this interesting insight came out that 73% of employees said that they want remote work to stay. They had invested in their home office, they had invested in the lifestyle that they had developed. Whereas 67% of them said, I still want to meet people, I still want more in-person work or collaboration post the pandemic. And this is something that Satya Nadella coined as the hybrid work paradox. This was 2021 in a nutshell. Like, what is hybrid work going to look like? With people wanting to work from home, but also wanting to have more collaboration in person. So that would pretty much be like the trailer of what 2022 would look like. Next slide, please. So we came up with the 5 trends that came out really well in the 2022 report. The first one is that employees have a new worth it equation. Now, this combines the whole data around how people are prioritizing their own well-being much more than before the pandemic. It brings in Gen Z and millennials like me, who might be considering an employer change. Not that I am, but there's a lot of people who have actually indicated that they want to consider an employee change post the pandemic. Next click, please. So the other one, and this is so big, right? Like you talk to any people manager, they'll tell you how badly they feel wedged between leadership and employee expectations. They feel like they're between a rock and a hard place. And that's the biggest insight that we got out of the 2022 version. Next click, please. The third one, and this is my favorite one, by the way. Leaders need to make the office worth the commute. We've come up with certain policies, right? Some companies say that come to office 3 times a week. Some people say it's completely fine to do full remote. But what's really important, and you saw that in the last 2021 version, is people still want to meet. But as leaders and as managers, we need to make the office worth the commute. How do your offices look like? What kind of culture do you have in promoting the fact that it's not just going to office to take meetings? Next click, please. The fourth one, we all felt this. We've all got some message at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. And that's something it's come out in a big way. Flexible work doesn't mean always on. I might be doing, and there's small organizational practices. In fact, Vivek and I both have it in our email signatures that I'm sending you this mail because this works for me and we work flexibly at Microsoft. You please don't feel obliged to reply back to it. So those are cultural nuances that we see building up as a part of hybrid work. Next click, please. The fifth one, people still want to connect. People still want to further their career, their ambitions, and talk to people, to their peers and colleagues. So rebuilding social capital looks very different in a hybrid world. So this is the small theory behind it. Let's see the data behind this. So next slide, please. So when we say employees have a new worth it equation, I think it's best personified by the fact that 57% of employees in Asia are more likely to prioritize their health and well-being over the pandemic. And this number is actually higher than the global average of 53%. The second one, 55% of millennials and Gen Z in Asia, and it is a fairly young demographic compared to the rest of the world, they are considering an employer change in the year ahead. Next slide, please. And we can see, like, consistently across the various countries in Asia Pacific that we surveyed, that they actually exceed the global average. So this is something we're seeing as a big trend where, you know, organizations are looking at retention and making attractive organizations to attract new talent and retain existing ones. Next slide, please. The second, so this is the second point, from managers feel wedged between leadership and employee expectations. So this is where we see that 78% of leaders in Asia say that they don't have the influence or resources to drive change for their employees. So and access to resources goes beyond technology, right? This is an access to feel empowered to take the right decisions that make sense for them, that makes sense for their business unit, that makes sense for their teams. The other big trend that you see is that 58% of leaders in Asia are saying that they're planning a full-time in-person work in the year ahead. And if you look at what you saw in the previous report, that people actually want flexibility. So if 58% of your leaders are saying, I want full-time in-person work, you are bound to lose talent in those places. So how are you gearing up for that change that's coming forward? Next slide, please. And perception varies when it comes to productivity. And I think that's really built on trust. The fact that we see that 62% of business leaders in Asia fear that productivity has been impacted negatively by moving from remote to hybrid. You know, it's one of those close quarters conversations where people say that I don't know what my team is doing. Is work getting done? Are we measuring what we're doing? But at the same time, if you look at 80% of workers in Asia saying that they feel more productive or as they work compared to a year before, that's a huge disparity. So that's something that we look to resolve as a part of hybrid work. Next slide, please. The next one. Leaders must make office worth the commute. But what does that really mean, right? So 41% of hybrid workers in Asia say that they don't know when and why to come to office. And this is where we see cultural practices such as team agreements to say, hey, you know, not forcing anyone, but let's say we want to come as a team on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and a Thursday, or maybe on a Monday or a Friday. And being inclusive in that and empowering managers and teams to take those decisions is super critical. Next slide, please. So the gap in leadership plans and employee expectations in Asia, and you can see like it's really comparing to the and this disparity between people saying that I want a full-time return versus I want to switch to hybrid and remote. It's consistent across all countries in Asia Pacific that we surveyed. Next slide, please. So this is this is another one, right? So flexible work doesn't mean always on. That number, 252% increase in weekly time spent in meetings for an average Teams user since February 2020. We have not used online tools of collaboration as much as we've started doing it. As much as technology can be an enabler, it can be something that can cause employee burnout as well. And that's something we recognize in our approach towards hybrid work. We also see a 32% increase in chats sent per person since March of 2020. So that's something which we call the digital overload. And that remains a risk for our organizations when it comes to attracting and retaining talent. Next slide, please. So rebuilding social capital, again, like this is where you want to really think about existing team members and new joiners joining your organization. So you see that they're thriving that only 75% have thriving relationships with their direct team, and 59% of them are struggling relationships with their direct team. So this is where we see that employees with better relationships actually report better well-being as good or excellent. Whereas if you compare it to productivity a year ago, the numbers look very different. So this is where we say that relationship building needs to be intentional from a leader and a manager perspective. Next slide, please. So we built this model. We built this model keeping people at the center. We need to think about our information workers, our frontline workers, our flex workers, or our contingent staff, and build processes and tools that cater to their specific needs. And that's where we want to make sure that we're empowering managers and employees to create cultures that make sense for them based on their geography, based on their demography within their teams. The second one, places. I'll take you back to that example. The way we revolutionized our own office desks at home, we need to think about revolutionizing the office spaces in our actual physical offices. So we see a lot of organizations actually investing in creating hybrid-friendly workspaces, where you actually have a space which is built for people that are dialing in remotely versus people who are dialing in person. You want to create that inclusive environment where they feel a part of the discussion when it comes to hybrid work. Last but not the least, processes. Automation is a big thing. How are you helping your organization think about automating repetitive tasks, manual paper-based automation, and there are different apps that actually fuel that conversation. So that's something in a nutshell that's brought together under the people, places, and processes framework. So that was a quick summary of the Work Trend Index. We drop a link to the actual Work Trend Index report, so do feel free to go through it and see the specific details on any pillar that you found super interesting. Next slide, please. Another interesting body of work that we've actually done is when we partnered with Josh Bersin, who I introduced earlier, we came up with an assessment model for any organization to go and understand how they rate in terms of their industry, in terms of their peers, and as compared to Microsoft, since we have a lot of data around that, in terms of their employee experience maturity and adoption of technology tools. So if you look at the bottom left corner of the screen, you'll see levels. You'll see level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is what we say is if an organization has implemented technology at a transactional level, it's considered at a lower level of maturity. That's level 1. The second one is like supportive environment where there's trust in leaders, there's open communication, but it's not really built in the flow of work. And then it comes up to level 3, which is about purpose-driven businesses. So where there's focus on mission and purposes in all interactions. You've built in a culture where it's intuitive and it's a value-based leadership model. And last but not the least is equitable growth. I'm making sure in large organizations, there's equitable growth is the highest level of what we call within the Josh Bersin assessment maturity model. And we map this across 3 outcomes. We map this across business outcomes, people outcomes, and innovation outcomes. Next slide, please. So essentially, what you can do, and again, like this is a 10-minute survey. It's a simple link that you can actually go and fill up a form really quickly, and you get a report that will tell you all of those numbers compared to your industry, compared to Microsoft. So that's one of the things that where you can actually get this data and use that in the conversation around hybrid work at your organization as well. So with no further ado, I would like to close my session for today. Do feel free to post your questions in the chat window, and I'll pass it over to Nishant. I hope you found this informative. Now we make it real with Microsoft Viva with Nishant coming in.
Hi, thanks a lot, Raj. Let me just share my screen. Great, I hope it's visible. So thank you very much. So indeed, some great insights into the Work Trend Index. I can relate to some of the findings personally myself. So good afternoon to everyone and welcome to this session where we'll start to look at making employee experience real for our customers, right, or our employees using Microsoft's new employee experience platform, which is Microsoft Viva. Now, as Vivek and Raj mentioned, over the last couple of years, how and where we work has changed forever, right? As companies adapt to hybrid work environments, we started to reopen physical spaces. Now, there is a renewed focus on this employee experience and making sure that people, are at the center of this process. And it is going to take a whole organization shift, right? It's a massive change for organizations. It spans the physical environment, as Raj was mentioning, office spaces, culture, talent, a whole bunch of things, including technology. People have started to relook at the technology itself, right? And leaders realize the importance of putting people first. But it's been challenging to create a great employee experience when people feel disconnected and job demands have increased and employee well-being is declining, and leaders are struggling to equip employees with this, the right skill set, the applications and tools that is needed to drive growth. Right? But the good news is that when companies invest in their people and in the employee experience, they can directly impact engagement and customer satisfaction and retention, productivity, profitability, etc. And there was a question that Vivek asked, can you link productivity back into employee experience? There is a lot of empirical data, and there's a lot of research and empirical data that actually supports this, right? And like this one, right? It's a Josh Burson research here, which concludes that organizations with elevated employee experience strategies, they gain disproportionate advantage from a people, innovation, and business outcome perspective, right? And they have identified certain areas under the people outcomes and innovation outcomes and business outcomes. It's a fascinating research article to actually go through. Now, there are many similar research, from MIT, especially, that comes to my mind that kind of suggests or that leads us to the same conclusion. And what such research proves is that people are no longer choosing a job based on a paycheck or a wonderful office and location, right? So they want purpose, they want flexibility, they want growth and development. They're looking at the culture. They want to belong to the organization. They want to make an impact, make a difference. And they really want more work-life balance, right? The worth it equation. Right? They are concerned about their well-being, their family's well-being, their emotional well-being, mental well-being, financial well-being, etc. Right? But so what is needed is a new approach and a new category of technology solutions, where what we call as the employee experience platforms, or the EXP. Now, an EXP, it's a digital platform, of course, and it kind of puts people at the center by bringing together systems of work with systems of support into an integrated employee experience. Now, this is important, right? It is kind of all the systems are kind of converging into the flow of work itself, and it provides people with the resources and support they need to succeed and thrive, agnostic of their location. It doesn't matter they're working from home, working in office, they're hybrid, etc. Right? Today, there are a lot of solutions. It is not as if there aren't a lot of employee engagement solutions. There are a lot of solutions in the market focused on employee engagement and well-being, but they're mostly point solutions, right? They're looking to solve one or a few of the symptoms, and the experiences are a bit disparate, right? Because you have multiple point solutions, and it's not a seamless experience that employees have. And today's solutions are fragmented and they are disconnected from where people are doing their work, right? The services and resources employees need are often undiscovered, right? Or locked up in systems of record rather than natural part of our people's communication and workflow, right? Now, Microsoft's vision is an integrated employee experience that brings together all these resources into the natural flow of everyday work. And that is why we built Microsoft's employee experience platform called as Microsoft Viva. And Viva is launched with 4 modules, Viva Connections, Viva Insights, Viva Topics, and Viva Learning. And all of these are available today. And recently, we also announced the availability of a 5th module. We are continuously investing into this employee experience platform, and you'll hear more and more from us in the coming months, right? And the 5th module is actually called as Viva Goals. And it is focused on something called as Objectives and Key Results, OKR. It is actually called as in short. And we acquired this through our acquisition of ally.io. So it's an acquired company. It's an acquired product that we have now bought it onto the Microsoft platform. And this will be available from Q3, the calendar year 2022. So in the next couple of months, this will actually be available to our customers. Now, each of these modules that you see on the screen, and they build on existing capabilities of Microsoft 365. So if you have invested in Microsoft 365 and Teams and Yammer and SharePoint and all of that, it builds on those capabilities. It enriches the experience of employees as they kind of work on these tools together. Now, I brought a very quick description. I'll just talk a little bit about each of this, but I will walk you through an employee journey and choose certain personas, and we can actually see how these modules actually work for those personas itself, right? So let me start with Viva Connections. A very brief introduction to it. Viva Connections is a company-branded employee app in Teams, right? It's a Teams app, right? And it is company-branded, which means you can brand it according to your company's requirements. And it acts as a gateway to your employee experience, right? It has personalized news and communications and tasks and people and resources. And it kind of provides a single curated employee destination that can be configured for specific roles, like frontline workers, knowledge workers, HR, sales, etc., can have their own configured views, right? Now, leaders can communicate and engage with their employees, and employees can also get easy access to the tools and resources they need, and all from one place, right? And it kind of builds on existing capabilities, like I said, in Microsoft 365, like SharePoint and Yammer can be integrated into it, and it pulls information and communications together from Teams as well. And I'll shortly show you what that actually looks like so that you can appreciate the fact that it brings together a whole bunch of resources and capabilities together. Now, Viva Insights brings new productivity and well-being experiences into a unified Viva Insights app, also running in Teams. It's also a Teams app, and it provides data-driven and privacy-protected insights for individuals, managers, as well as leaders, right? So individuals are able to get data about themselves, managers get privacy-protected data about their team, and leaders get privacy protected data about the entire organization itself, right? So that's the Viva Insights app. Now, Viva Topics focuses on knowledge and expertise. Another area where there's a lot of focus on in a hybrid mode where you don't have access to people, knowledge management has to change. The way you discover, disseminate knowledge also has to change, right? So Viva Topics focuses on knowledge and expertise, right? So Topics applies artificial intelligence to identify knowledge and experts and organize them into something called a shared topic. So it's like a Wikipedia for your enterprise where artificial intelligence does the first initial discovery and draft, right? And AI then automatically creates a topic page for each topic, and then these topic pages are surfaced. When you're using your Teams, when you're using your Outlook, emails, etc., these knowledge items will actually be available to you. Viva Learning, it allows employees to easily discover informal and formal learning in the flow of work. So it's basically learning. It aggregates access to content from LinkedIn Learning, Microsoft Learn, and third-party training content, and probably your own organization's content, but it'll all be available within Viva Learning within the Teams environment. So which means multiple learning content will be available in a single app. It's a very seamless in the flow of work kind of a training mechanism or a training platform or a learning platform, right? Now, it also allows managers to assign, track training. There is social learning built into it, and we'll actually get to some of those aspects as we go through some of the personas itself, right? And finally, our newest module, Viva Goals, right? So Viva Goals, it kind of enriches how people and teams come together to set goals and objectives, right? We always talk about people are very interested, especially the millennials and Gen Z, they're interested in purpose and mission. They want to understand the work that they're doing, how does it actually link to the overall objective and mission and purpose of the organization itself, right? So over the past year, we have been investing to bring the acquired solution into the Microsoft Cloud and evolve the existing integrations with Microsoft Teams and weave this whole solution into Viva Office, Power BI, and a broad set of Microsoft 365 capabilities itself. And this will be launched within a couple of months. Now, let me take you to a classification of these employee experience solutions before I touch upon the personas, because it's a very important distinction to understand, right? Now, within this platform, there are something called as systems of experience And then there are certain things called as systems of listening, and I'll specifically talk about the systems of listening and experience itself. Now, experience is daily usage. Employees have a very high touch point. They use it day to day, and the capabilities are actually available to the end users. Right? That's the system of experience. It's an end user experience and a high touch experience, right? And then within the system of experience, which actually runs within Microsoft Teams, you can actually build additional capabilities and employee journeys. Like you can develop apps for onboarding, you can build artificial intelligence-based bots, et cetera, or workflows, et cetera, right? Now, in systems of listening, this is slightly different, right? It's not something that an employee uses on a daily basis, or it's not a high-touch environment, but it is trying to understand the experience of employees by listening to active and passive data, right? It's also called as active and ambient data as well. So what I mean by active data is surveys, for example, is active data. Interviews is, for example, active data because you ask a question and people respond to you, right? So that's active data. And ambient data or passive data is data that already exists in your organization and you're able to collect, apply data science on it, and identify experience of people, right? And you can see that I've put in Viva Insights and Glint. So Glint has been announced. Glint, if you all recollect, is actually a platform from LinkedIn. It has been announced that Glint will actually become part of Microsoft Viva in the next few months, right? So we will announce that when it is actually going to become part of Microsoft Viva. So Glint is something that's coming up in the future. So these are the categorizations. The system of experience is important for employees. System of listening is more important for people, analysts, and leaders in the organization to understand the experience of employees itself. Right? And given this, I have selected personas for these two areas. Right. So one of them is actually a CHRO, Megan, who's our CHRO for today, and she is more interested in the system of listening. Right? She wants to understand the experience of people in the organization, because if she wants to make any changes and bring about change within the organization, she needs to measure what's going on in the organization at this, right now. She needs to listen and understand the experience of employees. And the second is Divya. She's a knowledge worker and she's an individual contributor, and she will be heavily involved in the systems of experience, right? Because she's going to be using these systems on a daily basis to achieve certain outputs or outcomes as part of a day-to-day job. So with that, let me just drill into some of these personas itself, right? So I'll start with Megan. And Megan for us is a CHRO, drives employee experience, and she also drives business strategy now, and as well as employee strategy, right? And she's been leading the people strategy for the last 5 years. And of course, COVID, as Vivek was mentioning, the subprime, the effect it had on CFOs, the COVID did have on the CHROs as well. So it was one of the biggest challenges in Megan's career itself, right? And she is collecting information through pulse surveys, and she does actually find that there is a huge risk of burnout that's coming back. There is disengagement in the organization. There is also a very high risk of attrition, especially from the millennials and the Gen Z. And in exit interviews, they've actually found that lack of learning, work-life balance, lack of effective managers and management is all the top reasons for voluntary attrition, right? And one of our key priorities is to build an employee listening mechanism to drive agility and employee experience within the organization itself, right? And you can see the challenges that she's actually going through. She is tasked with revamping employee experience and reducing disengagement, and of course, subsequently voluntary attrition, and building an effective employee listening system, which is the focus for us today, and implementing better managerial practices that are more adapted to hybrid work. Managing employees in a hybrid work is a different ballgame than managing employees who are actually on the floor, right? And also implementing and improving communications and and culture to suit hybrid work. When you're in office, for example, the culture is actually a little bit more easier to feel. Whereas if you're in a hybrid mode, culture is not that easy to feel. So there has to be the right kind of communication that's coming out from the leaders, from the organization itself. And of course, something that is usually top of mind of most leaders, not just the CHRO, is instilling this whole concept of diversity, inclusion into the organization culture itself, right? And of course, she has these persona characteristics. She's more of a PC user, decision maker, team leader, tech savvy. And most leaders are now very, very tech savvy, as well as she's more of a generalist, tending towards more of a generalist than an expert itself, right? And some of the aspects of employee listening that she gets access to from Viva, I'll go straight to some of the insights that she can gain from Viva from, let's say, an employee listening perspective, right? I'll dig into some of the more important ones. Now, first and foremost, leaders are extremely interested to find out what are the working patterns in my organization. What policies should I drive? Or how do I drive policies and interventions when I don't even know what the working patterns are in my organization? So these are some of the very easy to understand insights or easy to digest insights that we can actually generate very quickly. So we can actually categorize people in the organization and saying, hey, an X percentage of users or of your employees are early risers, right? Which is they start work maybe 6 a.m., 7 a.m., but they kind of taper off, after lunch or maybe 2 p.m., 3 p.m., they actually slow down, which is perfectly fine. I mean, that's the definition of flexibility during hybrid. Whereas there is another category of night owls who kind of tend to wake up a little late, and they stay on maybe until 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. and that's fine. And then there is a classification of workers like overnight workers. And then there is a bunch of employees who need help and urgent help. And those are the employees who are always on, right? So no matter if it is 7 a.m. or 9 p.m., they seem to have a very, very high activity rate throughout the day itself. And those are the employees who actually need help, right? So understanding some of these patterns, remember, these are pretty high level insights. You can go even deeper into these insights itself. Like, for example, starting to understand workloads. And some of these insights that I'm showing you are real customer examples with sanitized data, right? So these are actual outputs that we have delivered for some of our customers, like balance workloads. We all talk about, hey, I'm working too much, too hard, working overnight, et cetera, and understanding workloads in within teams or within departments or business units, et cetera, is actually essential to find out the employees or the percentage of employees who are at a very high potential of burnout risk, right? I mean, if you're working, for example, if you look at this particular chart, there are a group of employees within the engineering department that seem to be working more than around 40, 50 hours in a week, right? And there are some in the project management office that are actually working more than 60 hours. And these kind of work is not sustainable, right? Now, this also serves a purpose, an additional purpose, where we actually had a CFO of a Fortune 100 company looking at this data to push back on hiring requests, right? And it was much more granular than this. We're looking at team-based analysis of work week spans, and he said that you don't have a bandwidth problem, you have a work allocation problem, because some people seem to be working 20 hours to 30 hours and not much stressed, whereas others seem to be more stressed with 60 hours a week. It basically means that work is not getting allocated within the team in the right manner, so they used to push back on hiring requests itself, right? And some of them even monitored, after you hire maybe a couple of people into the team, because people are complaining about bandwidth, is actually the bandwidth getting better, right? Is the workload on existing employees going better? And what we found at one customer was that, when they hired new people into the team, the workload on the existing employees actually went higher, than it was before. The whole logic of hiring them was that, the workload was very high. But after having hired a couple of people into the team, the workload actually went high. It kind of defeated the purpose of the whole justification itself, right? Now, we also talk about silos, because we lose connection with people, right? Or departments and teams, they stop interacting with each other. We're not meeting them, et cetera, et cetera. And we can actually look at how these interactions happen. So Megan as a CHRO is able to identify, are there any teams that are actually siloed and any interventions that we can plan in conjunction with the leaders of those particular teams or managers of those particular teams itself, because everybody talks about silos in the organization, but nobody has ever measured a silo, right? For the first time, you can actually measure silo. You can actually find out how much collaboration does one team have with the other, right? Because we're using data here at the back end, we're using data from collaboration. So the meetings and emails and chats and calls and the team's channel chats, etc., that you're having, those are the data that we actually use to come up with these charts. Now, you can start to get a little bit more deeper into this. So Megan can actually start to identify managerial behaviors, leadership behaviors. Again, this was a project we did for one of our large retail customers, where we actually found that disengagement of employees, among a lot of other factors, were very, very strongly correlated with the network of their managers, number one, and the coaching that they received from their managers, manager one-on-one hours, right? So we found that there was very, very strong correlation, meaning if I was reporting to a manager who was very well connected in the organization, then I had a much higher chance of being engaged in the organization because my manager can open doors for me and I'll be very, very happy to work for him. Similarly, on the right-hand side, we actually found that managers who coach their employees on a regular basis, have enough manager one-on-ones, they seem to have employees who are much happier to be within the organization itself. And it was 4x was the difference in disengagement rates when compared to people who have twice as much as manager one-on-ones as those who don't, right? So it's a very strong correlation that we actually have over that. So you can correlate survey data that you collect, passive data, with the active data that you collect from surveys with the passive data that you actually get from Viva Insights to come up with these correlations itself. And they're super powerful. And another very interesting one is efficiency of processes that you have in organizations, right? This was a customer who had what is called as an XCOM meeting. An XCOM meeting was a meeting that used to be conducted with the CEO and around 6 or 7 executive committee members, right? It was a weekly meeting. And what they found was this weekly meeting took away 7,000 hours of time from the organization itself, right? But then we went in and started to do a subject line analysis of meetings and emails, and started to analyze the data. And what we found was shocking, right? I mean, this XCOM meeting, the executive committee members, they used to have 11 business unit meetings with the senior advisors of those business units, because they have to collect data for this executive committee meeting. Now, the senior advisors of these business units, they used to have 21 team meetings within their teams to synthesize information that was actually collected from 140 prep meetings at the lowest level. And when we tabulated all of this and looked at the hourly cost of people, the cost of executing this one meeting was $30 million in the organization. So 300,000 hours of people's time was actually spent in just one executive committee meeting, and they have a few dozen of such meetings that actually runs in the organization in various parts of the organization. Again, eye-opener. It has a huge impact on productivity within your organization, the way people spend time, and if all these people and all these time is actually required to conduct an executive committee meeting itself, right? And finally, something interesting around the onboarding and D&I, right? Onboarding in the sense, this is an organization. We looked at the junior level within a particular function. It took around almost 3 years for junior level staff to get to the same level of collaboration and network as existing staff. So which means the full time to productivity at the junior level was 3 years. And in the same function at a senior level, the full time to productivity was actually 4 years. It took 4 years for a senior person in that particular function to reach the same internal network size and the total collaboration hours as existing employees themselves, right? So there was a huge, I would say, time to productivity before people actually become fully productive. And also D&I, right? Diversity is easy to measure, but inclusion is incredibly hard to measure. So there are some of these capabilities here which actually looks at inclusion and measuring inclusion, right? And at one of our customers, we actually found that the female engineers, so this was specifically within their engineering team, The female engineers had much lower network than their male counterparts after the first 9 months of onboarding, right? And the factor that correlated most to this, the causal effect that they identified, was the fact that the male engineers were receiving more guidance from their managers, if you look at the right-hand side, one-on-one, than their female counterparts itself. So you can see in the first 4 months, the manager seems to be spending more time with their male direct reports than the female direct reports. It kind of continues, even though it's not that accentuated towards the last few months itself. So it's a coaching that can be provided to managers around inclusive behavior from a gender perspective within their team itself, right? And this is data that is helping us to get to those insights itself, right? Now, on that factor, there are many use cases, right? So these are things that Megan can really and quickly find out about the experience of employees within their organization using the Viva platform, right? And the use cases are quite a lot, right? I mean, it's divided into organizational agility, employee experience, as well as customer focus. You can also see how people actually are engaging with your customers, with your partners, with the vendors, etc., in the organization, and identifying any inefficiencies in those areas as well. But remember, what Megan has identified right now is pretty much like a health checkup, right? She's actually gone for a scan, a blood test, and the result is actually out. But unless you have some intervention, like you have to take some tablets, you need to change your diet, you need to exercise, unless you actually intervene, the status quo doesn't change. So based on these insights, Megan, as a CHRO, is now able to have or design interventions to impact employee behavior within the organization itself. And these interventions could be at an individual level, it could be at a collective level where you're actually inducing certain social expectations, or it could be environmental, where you actually change the structure, maybe redesign the workplace, or change the organization structure, etc. And those are environmental changes. Like, for example, if you find that the problem is that low employee engagement is highly correlated with manager one-on-one meetings, then some of the possible interventions could be that you train managers on how to conduct these one-on-one meetings, make it compulsory for them to have these one-on-one meetings at specific intervals. And then a collective intervention would be that you reward managers for employee development. So you incentivize managers for employee development. And an environmental change could be that you create spaces, more spaces for private conversations, maybe open spaces, one-on-one. You can design your workplace in such a way that actually promotes these manager one-on-ones, etc., or maybe even invest in technology, etc., that actually makes it easy for you to have these one-on-ones, either through technology or the space itself. So that's pretty much the CHRO, right? Megan. So Megan is the focus that I had for Megan was the systems of listening, right? Now, getting back into our next persona is Divya, right? So she's a knowledge worker, and she's been in the org for around 5 years. She's an individual contributor, aspiring to be a manager in the next 1 to 2 years and working with her manager on that. She has flexible work hours. She starts work at 10 and finishes off at 7. That actually gives her a little bit of flexibility to manage her family and kids. And she also has, her colleagues working in Europe. So that particular time helps her to connect with her colleagues in Europe as well. And she's already involved in 3 projects, and she's now recently being assigned as a V team into a new internal project. And this is a new area of expertise for her. And she's trying to get up to speed quickly on this, right? And the challenges that she has is, she needs to skill up. She's part of this V team in a new internal project, right? And she's unsure of who the experts are in the organization and how do I stay connected with the global team and aligning her daily project activities to the organization goals. I mean, she's actually working on certain things. She wants to understand how it kind of aligns to the organization goals, and of course struggles to disconnect at the end of the day, right? It's like, there's a little bit of work-life balance issues. And then there are some personas, right? She's more of an expert, tech-savvy team member, more towards a contributor, and she tends to use PC more than the mobile itself, right? And a day in life, if I look at an employee journey for her, so she's coming into office on this particular day, and while commuting, she actually remembers that she hasn't done her health check. She hasn't submitted a health declaration form, so she uses the health check app on the move using the Viva platform and actually submits it before she gets to office. And while she's using Viva, she actually gets a communication that mentions that her one of her ex-managers has just got promoted, And she uses the Viva platform to actually send a praise to the manager, an awesome card to her manager. And when she gets into office, she finds that a manager has booked focus time, do not disturb time for her, 2 hours of focus time for her. So she gets into office, she gets into this do not disturb mode, and she started to review some of the architecture documents that she's actually working on in project. There'll be no notifications, no disturbance from Teams or emails coming into her when she's in a do not disturb mode, again, enabled by Viva itself. And during the focus time, she also uses this time to take up some learning because she finds that her new team leader, who's part of the new project that she's joined, has recommended a training for her, right? And again, the recommendation comes through the Teams, the Viva platform, and she uses this opportunity of the do not disturb mode, 2 hours, to complete that particular training. And she finds that this is useful for another colleague that she's been having a conversation with. And through Viva, she even makes a recommendation to the other colleague as well. And then she also has, that's what we call a slow learning. Slow learning in the sense you learn using learning content, right? And then there's a fast learning. She's browsing through some of the Teams channels and she comes across an unfamiliar word called as SOAR, and she uses Viva to identify what that knowledge is. And then she has a fast learning on that particular project. She finds that SOAR is actually a project that is related to something that she's working on. She identifies who the expert is and pens in a one-on-one with the expert to have a chat later. And there's also emails that actually keeps her honest about the things that she has to do. And she actually is working on a customer-facing website. So she's actually doing some coding, and once she's actually done, she actually checks it in and updates status within the Viva platform. And finally, she does a little bit of knowledge management activity because once she's actually completed the project, she actually goes in and updates the knowledge management area itself. And then Viva will actually remind her to disconnect for the day, saying that, hey, at 5 o'clock or at in this case, she actually disconnects at 7 o'clock. At 7, there is a notice that goes to her saying, yep, it's time for you to disconnect. And there is some disconnect that she can actually do on the Viva platform itself. So this is the journey of her one-day journey. Now, if we go through this step by step, right, and take a look at what it looks like within the application. So the first thing is she's commuting and she's using a mobile. And what you see is actually a Viva Connections, and she's now going to use the health, the health check app. So she can click on that health check app, accept the disclaimers, fill in the form, and she can actually submit it. Remember, this is not something developed by Microsoft. Her organization has this. And you can see there's a whole bunch of other third-party resources that her organization has that she can actually have access to. She reads through the feeds, the news, etc. And this is exactly where she finds that one of her managers have actually just got promoted. She can actually comment right then and there, because there's an integration to Yammer, or she can send the card later, right? And she can continue to browse. She can give feedback on certain things that she sees within the app itself. There are videos that actually play in the app, and she's actually saved some items for future viewing. And the user interface is super simple. That's a mobile interface for her. It makes it very easy for her to find information, find documents within the experience itself. And of course, she has access to resources. There are HR resources, there are Thrive resources, etc., that she actually gets very, very quick access to. Now, remember, the whole concept is bringing systems of work and systems of support together, right? So if you look at this environment, it has actually brought together Viva into the Teams platform. So she can see the activities, she can see the chats, she can see the calendar. It's all integrated into the same platform, right? So she does this, she's commuting, she's just submitted the health check form. She's actually found that one of her managers have got promoted. Using Viva, she's also able to send praise to her manager. So she clicks on the Send Praise app. There's a praise that actually comes up. She can actually choose her manager. She can decide to send a one-on-one chat praise, or she can actually put it into a Teams channel for others to see as well, right? So she sends this praise within the Viva platform to her manager. And you can see that all of this is actually performed within the Viva app in Teams, right? And when she steps into office, she's in a do not disturb mode. You can see the way focus hours actually work. You can choose to book 1 hour's time slots or 2 hours time slots for you to get into that focus mode. And when you are in a focus mode, you will not get any notifications, right? I mean, people can still send you emails and send you messages, but you will not be notified. So you will not be disturbed from your train of thought itself. And this is something that a manager can set up after discussing with the team. You can say that, okay, the team is actually going to have maybe 10 a.m. to 12 as the focus time. We're not going to have any meetings. We're not going to get anyone to disturb us. This is the time for us to do focus work. every single day, right? And while she's in the focus work, she can see that within the environment, within her systems of work, she gets a notification saying that, hey, your new team lead has just recommended a course for you because you're part of this new team. There is a course that he has actually recommended for you to actually take up because you're kind of skilling up for the new project, right? And you can click on that, or you can even look at all the recommendations you have from different people. So you can see within the same platform, you can see all the learnings, and you can see the learnings are from different content providers. You have Coursera, you have LinkedIn, Udemy, etc. There are different kinds of course providers within this platform. You can click on the training, within the platform. You can click on this run button, and you can actually run this training. So, Divya kind of completes that particular training that was recommended. So it just came into a system of work. She clicked on it. She conducted the training. And once it is actually done, she found that this is going to be useful for one of her colleagues, right, Alex, and she had a chat with. And she kind of just goes into the chat within Teams. She has not left the Teams platform. She chooses the Learning Java applications, which is actually recommended for her, and she sends it to Alex as well. So this is social learning, right? And there's a lot of research in social learning, meaning when your colleague, your friend, your manager, your team lead, they recommend a training, there's a higher chance that you'll actually do that particular training. So this is the slow learning aspect, right? You're learning through course materials, etc. Then she gets into her normal work. She's actually reading through a particular channel, and then she comes across something called as SOAR, right? There's a project SOAR, and she's like very curious. What is that SOAR? She sees an underline, meaning that it has a knowledge item associated with it. She just moves her cursor on it, and she can actually see the knowledge item. So you did not have to search for knowledge. Knowledge looked for you. Knowledge found you in the end user systems, right? So it's a paradigm shift in knowledge management, right? So you did not search for it. So here she's able to see a summary of this particular project SOAR, the experts of this project, etc. And if she's really interested, she can click on the view details, and it opens up the whole page. It's a topic page itself, right? So you can see the topic page. You can see who the experts are of this particular topic. You can see the documents and resources that you can refer to learn a little bit more about this topic. And this topic is being discussed in Yammer, and you can see all the Q's and A's and questions and answers in Yammer that has been aggregated and brought into the Viva topics area itself. And you can also see a knowledge network, right? You can see that this project SOAR is not something that is standalone. It is also related to a whole bunch of other topics that you actually see within the organization. So what is happening right now is AI is helping you to do what is called as fast learning. Right? As and when you encounter certain things and knowledge items are available, you can just move your cursor and find that. Right? This solves the problem of knowledge, retention of knowledge, etc. in organizations. Right? And of course, you can join these Yammer communities and all of this. Right? And as she's working through this, she also gets an email. Through Viva, she gets an email that's her daily briefing. I'm sure most of you would have seen this daily briefing, email from Viva that actually tells her that she needs to send her team lead a project outline before the project review meeting, and so she gets to start working on it, right? So there's almost like a personal assistant working in the background, helping you to understand what you're doing, right? And then she's been coding, right? And she's been actually working on improving her website redesign. So within the Viva environment, she's able to see the goals and the fact that she's actually working on this website redesign. And the project ends in 5 days, and she's supposed to check in her, status, right? And she can actually directly run this from here. She can click on that particular, check-in, and you can see that the goals, right? She's actually working on this reduced page load time from 1.5 seconds to 700 milliseconds. It actually aligns to an objective called as deliver beloved high-value product offering, etc., etc. So you can see that she's been allocated to it. She can just click on this particular check-in icon, and she can update the progress, etc. This can also be integrated into your GitHub and Jira and Azure DevOps and all of this, so you don't even have to enter progress. It automatically takes progress from these systems of system of work, right? And then you can check it in, and her work has now been updated. Her status has now been updated, right? And she goes into manage topics. She needs to update something regarding her project within the knowledge management base. So you can see she's working on one of the projects that she's working on is Project Blue, and currently it has delivered some additional capabilities, right? So it created a new fleet of airborne supply delivery within To our job site, she wants to edit that. So she clicks on edit. So remember, this is like Wikipedia. This is like crowdsourcing, right? She can click on edit in the topic page and she can edit that, right? And you can see that she adds that, now across uneven terrain sites as well. She updates things. She can add web parts. It's like it's a SharePoint site at the end of the day. And she can republish this so that new users who come and look for the Project Blue get updated information. Right? So she's actually done that knowledge management. The contribution towards knowledge management is also done within the Viva platform itself. And finally, when it is time, maybe 7 o'clock, it's time for her to leave. So Viva actually starts off something called as a virtual commute, and she can start this virtual commute. It'll actually walk you through all the today's activities. You can say whether it's done or whether you want to move it to the next day. It'll actually show you what is coming up tomorrow for you. What are the activities and what are the things that are actually on your calendar, on your to-do list for tomorrow. Click on next. It'll actually ask you to pause and reflect. You can do an emotional check-in, and this is only meant for your eyes only. And then once that is done, it takes you through a guided meditation for around 10 minutes, right? So it's kind of so that you can unwind, and it is an integration we have to a wellness provider called as Headspace. It guides you through meditation itself so that she can wind up for the day and she gets into a personal mode from her professional mode. So that's a day in life of Divya, and all of this was actually done within the Viva platform. Of course, there are multiple modules of Viva use, but it was all done within the Viva platform itself. Right? Now, finally, I mean, it's always interesting to ask, what is an ROI for employee experience? It's a very difficult thing to define ROI for employee experience. So there is this new concept that is actually made more popular by PwC. It's actually called as return on experience, right? So that is something that is a better measure for measuring, return on the value, right? Basically of employee experience initiatives, right? And right on the top, I've actually used an MIT research that kind of suggests that companies that provide these great employee experiences are 25% more profitable. They generate 2x revenues from new products, and they have adjusted NPS scores that are 2 times those of companies with low employee experience. So there is empirical evidence, right? But below that, what you'd see is that it's not a direct measure, right? I mean, as employees start to go through the culture, the technology, the experience within the organization, there are certain intangibles, right? I mean, like pride, for example. Are you emotionally connected? For example, me working in Microsoft, am I emotionally connected to the purpose and strategy of Microsoft and the brand Microsoft itself, right? So similarly, in your own organizations, are employees connected to your brand? The purpose and strategy of your own organizations, because if you are, then you actually become influencers, meaning you become both internal and external brand ambassadors. When a new employee onboards, you reflect that pride in your purpose and strategy to the new employees, to your customers, to your partners, to your vendors, etc. Right? So you become influencers, both internal and external. And then there are shift in behavior. So there are positive habits that actually develop within the organization, and that kind of defines your culture, and it helps you to drive excellence in the organization itself. For example, managerial behavior, like managers in Microsoft, they're mandated to have one-on-one check-ins every fortnight. Like once every 2 weeks, they're supposed to have these one-on-ones, and it is not about performance or reviewing your performance. It is about what help do you need, how can I help you, what are your aspirations, what are you struggling with. Anything is actually on the table other than your job performance and all of that, right? So that becomes behavior. Those becomes like positive habits you actually develop in the organization. And then you have value drivers, right? In the eyes of employees, there are certain value drivers. Like I found with the bank that one of the value drivers that they liked was sending the praise, right? They were able to praise. So sending and receiving praise was a value driver. They felt valued when they received praise. It's a very, very small feature or function, but it was highly valued, right? Whereas another one could be that, I'm able to actually get access to these applications very quickly using a mobile interface, or for a CHRO, I'm able to understand, the lived experience of my, employees, etc. So those are value drivers, and people will identify value drivers that they actually believe in and they actually love, and the magic that creates, right? And then comes the outcomes, right? And the outcomes could be, there are multiple outcomes we could look at. I just selected something that is very dear to most CHROs right now, which is, improving employee engagement and reducing voluntary attrition within the organization itself. And there is a way to calculate these as well, right? And I'll just go through one of them, which is the employee engagement aspect of it. And I've actually based it on a Gallup report that actually mentioned that disengaged employees cost organizations 34% of their salary in lost productivity. That's pretty high, actually. And I've seen a few other research articles as well. I mean, they differ in numbers, but not by much, right? Now, in the work trend index in 2021, 41% was the disengagement rate. 41% was the amount of employees who wanted to leave the company. So I just chose a number of 40% disengagement. Now that seems to be the norm. At 40% disengagement in your organization, and if your organization has 10,000 employees with an average salary of around $50,000, we are talking about an addressable annual opportunity of 68 million. When I need to clarify this, it is an addressable opportunity. It's not a saving or a revenue that you're going to make. It's an addressable opportunity. It's like saying your addressable market is 100 billion. You may make a small percentage out of it, right? So if Viva, for example, or an employee experience platform can mitigate some of these leading causes of disengagement, and let's assume that you make a 5% dent in your disengagement, that is 5% off your 40%, you make a small dent in your disengagement, which means you improve your engagement by 5%, then you're actually looking at a 3.4 millions in actual savings, right? So this is more realistic, right? I mean, you can't expect to make the 68 million, but that's the whole addressable market. So similarly, there is a calculation that we can actually do when it comes to attrition itself, because Gallup actually reports that the average cost to replace an employee is 250%. So if you use the same calculations of 10,000 employees, 50,000 average salary, it's a massively big number that we're actually looking at. But if you're able to reduce attrition by a very small percentage, like let's say 5%, we're looking at 7.5 millions in actually savings in just employee replacement costs. There are still other costs that we can actually save by retaining employees in the organization itself. So I just wanted to present to you, the way we are actually looking at, return from moving from ROI specifically to return on experience, because there are lots of intangibles like pride and influence and your behaviors, the magic and the value drivers, etc., that is inherently part of employee experience and very, very difficult to measure per se. All right, so that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for being an attentive audience. We will actually go through the Q&A. I'll hand it back to Adam at this point.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Vivek, Nishant, and Raj for an insightful session. It was also a wonderful applaud to our participants for spending this afternoon with all of us here. I think the sharing on the index was very useful. Raj talks about changes. He started off with asking changes in our home office in light of the hybrid work setup, right? I think just to share, before that, I was just having a simple desk and table, but we work from home. I brought a solid secret lab chair or something that cost me $200, but subsequently it ends up in my son's room playing his games, and I'm using the standard old IKEA $20 chair. So it is something, it is real, it is affecting many of us in the workplaces. So definitely those insights, reports that are being shared is definitely useful for us to see and how best we can use those figures and information. Then Nishan also talks about the employee experience platform. I think this is necessary because it provides the right platform will provide us with the ability to seek further insights of the organizational activities. You can see, are they the night owls? Are they the early risers and so on? So it is very useful with this kind of a platform so that you can seek more analytics and also make decisions from there. So I think this session has been beneficial to all our participants. And if you see the screen here, please do not leave just as yet. We seek your kind support to fill up the feedback. You can scan the QR code. Because with this input and feedback, we hope to organize more subsequent relevant learning events to our audience. So please fill up the form before you go. That's it for now, folks, actually. I think thank you again to the hrtech.sg folks and Vivek and your team from Microsoft for a lovely sharing. And I hope to see all of you again for our future webinar. and learning events. So please do fill up the feedback form. It is very useful input for us. With that, have a wonderful week all, and goodbye.